Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today for our webinar, which is on the topic of analytics. My name's Luke Gaydon. I'm the Vice President of Marketing Solutions and Innovation for Accedo, and we're very happy to be partnering with Dativa on this webinar. A quick introduction: Accedo is the video experience pioneer. We've been helping media, entertainment and sports companies redefine their video experiences for nearly 10 years now. We see intelligent use of data as a mission critical aspect of our customer services, and we're delighted to work with market leading experts in the shape of Dativa around that topic. So without further ado, let me hand you over to Giles Cottle, who is going to take you through the presentation. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks so much, Luke, and thanks everybody for joining. I'll actually be joined by a colleague of mine in the presentation today, Jan Lindqvist, who is Dativa's OTT analytics specialist. My name is Giles Cottle. I'm the managing director of our consulting practice and one of the founders of Dativa. So I'm going to talk very briefly about Dativa and who we are and kind of what we do. And then we're going to split the presentation really into two parts. Jan is going to kind of talk through some of the tools and processes we use when we first start working with a customer, and kind of how we help them to understand kind of where they are on their analytics journey and how they can improve that. And then I'm going to talk about Jan will lay out some stages, and I will then talk about some of the projects we do for customers at those various stages. Very quick introduction to Dativa. We're a professional services company. We work almost exclusively with media companies, and we've all been working with data for a long time. We have about 25 data scientists, engineers, and customer success executives, and we are located in San Francisco, New York, London, and Mumbai. Our projects you can usually split into kind of three categories. When we first start working with a customer, and Jan will kind of talk through a lot of this in his part of the presentation, we'll do a lot of work around strategy, so helping them to understand actually what it is that they want to do with data, and the things they need to do to kind of get those foundations in place. We have a big engineering practice who will help companies to build all of the kind of elements that you need when you are thinking about a big data infrastructure, things like pipelines and data warehouses, and APIs, cleansing software, reporting, all of that good stuff. And then when all of your data engineering is done, and when all of your infrastructure is set up, that's when the data science piece comes in. So we then have a team who will work with your data to help you to build the models that you need in order to get out of the data what it is that you need, be that kind of better subscriber analytics or kind of working on the ad sales side, kind of operational improvements. Our team will take your data and help you to make sense of it for those goals. We're very lucky. We have worked with lots of kind of big media brands. We work with some of the biggest broadcasters in the US, some of the world's largest cable operators. We work with TV OEMs. We do a lot of work with the big global agency holding groups. So kind of everybody across the kind of TV spectrum are kinds of clients that we work with. And I think it's kind of worth laying out. I think we're slightly different to some of the other firms in the sector. We have a lot of experience. We're very niche, but we've had a lot of experience around not just working in data, but working in TV data, which has its own kind of sets of skills and kind of experiences that we need to get our heads around. So we've done a lot of work around that. Because of that, we're quite quick to market. We know some of the kind of main pitfalls to avoid when, say, building AWS infrastructure for a big set of TV data. And we've worked, when we come to a project, we're usually not, because of this experience, we're usually not coming to it from scratch. So we have kind of reference approaches to things like how we would best build a model to manage user churn, and how we would best models around kind of ad optimization. But what we don't do is bring an off-the-shelf. We don't bring an off-the-shelf product. A lot of our experience shows that kind of more and more customers are actually in. Data is so key, and kind of companies have such specific needs that more and more customers actually want something that's quite bespoke, or at least kind of adjusted for their needs. So even though we will come with a reference approach, we will almost always optimize it for whatever for whatever kind of specific needs that the individual customer has. So that's kind of how we see ourselves in the market. So that's a brief introduction to Dativa. I'm now going to hand over to Jan, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the ways we help companies to understand how to better compete using analytics. So over to you, Jan.
Thanks, Giles. Thanks for the introduction. Now I'm going to go into competing on analytics. When we work with our customers, we're getting many different questions of how can I use the data in different ways. You might need a data science type of activity with a predictive model, and there might be some strategic questions of how do you monetize that data. It's interesting to see that the type of questions that are asked reveal a lot about the customer. And this is something that Luke and I sometimes talk about, is the savviness of these customers. And I'm going to go into showing a little bit what are the traits of these customers. What we typically do is Giles and I run this workshop series, and we wanted to share some of this experience. How do we understand these customers and how can we help them? And going to the next slide. The typical format of our slides is we cover 3 areas. First, we go into how analytics savvy are you? And this is one of Luke's favorite topics. And then we go into what are the weak points to apply getting it better at the analytics savviness. I won't spend too much time. The format of the webinar won't allow us to spend more time on it, but I'll be covering what are the main areas to be looking at. And then part 3, what are the types of activities that should be applied within a company? And this is where I'm going to have Giles go into more details. I wish I'd have more time to go into many examples surrounding these topics, so I'm going to be limiting for the purpose of this webinar. First part is how savviness are you? And I'll first be talking about there's a lot of failures when applying analytics. And I'd say analytics in a broad term, as how do you get the insights? How does a business work around the information you're collecting? And we have this a chart showing the analytics questions that are being asked, and it reveals your analytics sophistication. And the last part is looking at which stage is a company based on the type of questions they're asking. Typically, we do it as a group exercise, but we won't have it for this webinar. First part is, unfortunately, the fact is you're most likely to fail. There have been some surveys which show that from the 86% that actually did go for a data-driven culture, only 37% succeed. Interesting to see is that there is a lack of organization alignment within the company. And this can be attributed to the middle management failing to understand how to apply, or even resistance into making change. Why? Because the old system works. Why do we need to change? And it's a little alarming that one needs to be looking at the data more. And here's a list of what do you need to care for? Why? Subscription growth and OTT is flat or declining. And there's a strong competition from companies like Netflix. So you need to be more effective to attract and retain your subscribers. The TV ad spending is down in most markets. And you're seeing that the digital is increasing their revenue. Also, the competition is getting very data savvy. and it's something you need to be watching out for. And the stakeholders, like the advertisers, want to have an improved in targeting and more efficiency in their ad spending. Here's a list of some of the challenges from a business perspective and a technology. Leadership, there's no top leadership surrounding what should be done. Business KPIs are not aligned strategically. There's not data-driven actions. Slow to market, hard to find businesses or people. Teams are busy, overloaded. And from a technology perspective, there are a lot of legacy systems that need to be converted to more modern. They might even be on premises and they need to be made into the cloud. And by moving them to the cloud, you make a more effective insight into the information. And if you haven't been keeping up to date, there might be a poor performance. And you may also be running into spiraling of costs. So, and you're not getting the desired output that you want. I thought it would be interesting to show what are some of the more successful companies that do have a data-driven approach. From a return of investment, they might be failing, but in the longer term, the return of investment is giving them a good return. And also, it's not few experiments. Companies are running a lot of experiments. So it doesn't suffice to run a few and fail and then give up. You need to continuously running experiments to enhance the models and your insights. And this is, I think, Luke's favorite diagram, our analytic savviness diagram. And this helps typify how do we, when we get questions, what level they might be. And it might be some inspiration as well to, okay, let me try to get a more advanced set of questions. And I'm going to describe them in 3 areas. In the bottom left, you're having very basic questions of, I want to just get standard reports or even ad hoc. Do I want to drill down into a problem and looking through the data? And then maybe I'm setting up alerts. This category, we call it the descriptive. And we're going to go into several examples later when Giles continues. And then they're getting more sophisticated by looking, let's look more at the statistics. What is happening? Why is it happening? And you're starting to creating some forecasting and even creating some predictive modeling. And I'm not talking about only the tools that provide these type of statistics. I'm talking about combining the data and getting more insights than if you had a single tool. And this is what we call the understanding category. So you're starting to look at trends, you're predicting. And then at the top is you actually are able to act upon the data. So you're actually doing experimental design, you're finding ways to optimize, and you're also doing using machine learning to learn more from the data. Based on the kind of questions that are being asked, we also look at the company. What stage are they in the development? At the very bottom, we call them, I'm sorry to say, they're analytically impaired. That means that the leadership doesn't see any value in the data that they're collecting. It's not doing anything for the business. What happens in the next stage is, and this takes longer to achieve your objectives, but there might be a localized analytics effort. So in a department, there might be a department manager setting additional resources to do a localized experiment. And then he needs to show to the leadership team, this is my success. We should apply it throughout the company. Unfortunately, this takes longer for a company to become analytic savvy. The levels 3 and 4 are on the way. So 3, leadership has decided, let's go for analytics aspirations. And 4 is when you actually achieve it. So 3 is you're on the way, you have a plan, you have set it up. And 4, I've actually achieved it. And the level 5 is you're actually a dominant position in the market, and you can use that and analytics to keep ahead of the competitors. If you're not doing it, you might be dominant right now, but if you're not applying this analytics savviness, you might fall behind. The next part is, how do then I succeed? How do I get to that stage 5? You first need to determine what are my weak points in the organization. And this part, I would typically do polling to get what are your impressions, but we won't have it for the webinar, where I introduce this concept of a delta. And what you're seeing down at the bottom right is a spider view showing in the center is what am I currently, what stage I am from 1 to 5. What is my short-term goals and what are my long-term, so that I'm applying to each of these areas that I'm going to touch on to be more analytics savvy. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. We'd spend more over in a workshop. So I'm going to go briefly through them. What are they? So it gives you some things to think about within your organization. First is data. You need a high quality, accessible and distinctive data. If you don't have it, then you need to build that, put it in place. Enterprise, you need to also do a coordinated effort within the company. There might be analytics teams all spread out the company. Sometimes you might need to centralize to make sure there's a more coordinated effort and usage of the resources or spreading the knowledge. A very fundamental to get past that stage 2 is leadership. Is a strong, committed leadership that understands the importance and advocating of analytics. And the decisions are based on the insights that analytics gives. The targets, it helps you focus. You know what is your business goals, and you're trying to create a target that ties the insights that you're getting with analytics to meet those targets. The technology, you have to have the most effective and cost-effective solution in place. Analytics is 2 parts. One is from the human side, you need to have the right team, you have the right data scientists to run the business, or you need to even have a partner that can complement your team to have that expertise. And then also you need to have the more advanced techniques. And one advice on this analytics part is it's good to have collaborate with companies that are independent of tools that they promote. A tool neutral company to be able to give you the best advice and how do you develop the analytics part. And then the last part is privacy. With GDPR, you need to be very careful with how you use the data. So it's having the insights of what can you do and what you can't do. And the bit systems are often built without privacy by design in mind, and they need to be converted to best safeguard the data. So this is part of the introduction of the Delta. And the last part, and I'm going to be handing over to Giles, is he'll go into what actions can I then actually take to increase the analytic savviness. And we have a number of modules. We have more than these 3, but in this case, we're going to present these 3 of describe, understand, and act. If we had time also, we would also describe what is a data-oriented society. What do you need to keep in mind when you're using analytics? And I'm going to now hand it over to Giles.
All right, Jan, thanks very much. So I'm just going to go through, so Jan's kind of laid out the framework of describe, understand, and act really nicely. And I think when we look at kind of how we run projects, a lot of them really fit into one of these three buckets. So I'm just going to kind of go through how we think about each stage, and some media and sector specific examples of things we've worked on that I hope you will find interesting and useful. So I think one of the really big misconceptions about the describe stage is that I think a lot of companies approach this, first of all, from an angle of wanting to, describe means being able to understand what is happening in your company and what your data is showing, and getting that to as many people in the company as possible. So actually, when I think when people think about the describe stage, what they're really thinking about is kind of these is pretty dashboards, frankly. So being able to visualize how a new show that has launched has done, or whether you are stealing share from your competitors, and all of that kind of stuff. But really, when we, this kind of visualization is really important, and it's important for it to kind of reach that right audience. But actually, the visualization part is really only a kind of the tip of the iceberg, because there is, there's an age-old mantra that applies to data as much as anything else, that if you put garbage into something, you will get garbage out. So in order to get these pretty dashboards to provide kind of information and data that is useful, and to provide it in a timely manner, there's an awful lot of frankly kind of less sexy but just as important work that needs to go on behind the scenes from a data engineering perspective. So before we start to build dashboards and think about how we can visualize the data, we need to do a ton of work around actually looking at what is available data-wise, and understanding kind of the scope and the limitations of those data sets, and work out and go through this whole process before we can start thinking about how best to visualize it. So this is just I won't go into detail on all of these slides, but with most companies, when we first start an engagement, we'll take them through something similar to this, which is our data audit, our kind of data audit structure. So we will look at every kind of stage of the data generation process. We will go through. We'll look at data collection and whether the right tools are being used to collect the data, and understanding kind of if there are any issues there. Data cleansing is a huge issue. I think that everybody knows that the kind of bad data and data full of errors really stops you getting where you want to get in the later stages. So we do a lot of work trying to understand where there are obvious signs of poorly cleansed data, understanding how quality issues get communicated, and understanding how we can actually help, because often some of these issues can be solved quite quickly. So understanding if there are any quick fixes to improve this stage. We will look at how the data is being transformed and stored, and whether it's being transformed and stored in a sensible way for the use cases that the customer has in mind. And we, from a storage perspective, will look at whether the database schema that the company is using makes sense, whether it makes sense for the type of data being collected, and making sure that that's all kind of shipshape. And only when those stages we're kind of satisfied with, will we start looking at the reporting and how that piece works. So we've done a lot of our projects are around helping a company to kind of improve its data infrastructure. We'll often work with customers who have a data infrastructure that may have worked for the business 10 years ago, but they may have acquired another company, or they may have many more customers, or they may have onboarded multiple other data sets, so that that infrastructure that made sense 10 years ago now probably isn't fit for purpose. So we do a lot of work essentially rebuilding, not just rebuilding on premises solutions, but also rebuilding AWS infrastructure. The innovation curve on AWS is so high that actually it often makes sense to kind of rebuild using the newest AWS tools available. So this is for a large media customer that had built AWS data pipeline that was now kind of very slow and I think costing them a large amount of money. And we rebuilt this completely using modern AWS tools, which has greatly fixed throughput and reduced the kind of friction within the company of using the data that they were interested in, which is really valuable, because ultimately you want, as we said, you want as many people as possible in your business to understand what the data is saying. And so when we look at dashboards, really it's kind of less about just looking at this, the kind of images on the right of this slide with the pretty visualizations, but it's a whole process that goes on before that's kind of equally as important. So, but the describe stage definitely has a lot more engineering components to it than perhaps meets the eye. So the next stage is the understand stage. So, now that you've got your infrastructure up and running and you've got your reports that are displaying kind of useful information to your executives and to your operational teams, the next stage is to actually start to understand kind of what that data says, what it's, it's the difference between looking at the fact that Game of Thrones is your most popular show, or that you over-index against the comedy genre, and actually understanding what that means for your business and starting to think about how you should what you should do now that you have that knowledge and that understanding. And I wanted to look at, there's lots of lenses that you could look at this through this kind of understand stage, but I think a particularly interesting one at the moment is D2C companies. So obviously direct to consumer, I think we've all seen the kind of multiple headlines that most of the big US media groups and many of their European counterparts are now starting to create direct to consumer services. What's super interesting is also that it's not just the kind of traditional media players who are doing this. So you'll get a lot of sports rights holders who are also taking their rights direct to consumer. So there's a ton of companies that have content or licensing rights that are starting to try and build that relationship with customers and bring services directly to them. And so there's a lot of big companies who are at the moment actually in this, in this understand stage. We're about to release a white paper on what we think direct consumers should do from an analytics perspective in the first 90 days. And that some of the kind of key findings I think that we had are laid out on this slide. So I think it's super important for D2C companies to use the data that they're getting to understand how it fits into how the D2C app fits into their kind of overall business ecosystem. If you're a big US media group and you have kind of affiliate revenues, subscription revenues, traditional advertising revenues, and then also your D2C revenues, it's understanding actually how is D2C impacting that ecosystem? Is it cannibalizing your other revenue sources, and kind of understanding what that looks like? So really putting it into the perspective of your wider business. Something that's really working out what good looks like. This actually came from a client brief who for a project which we included in this presentation. But the client's literal kind of one sentence brief to us was, "We've launched an OTT service. It seems to be doing okay, but we don't actually know. We don't know what good looks like in OTT in the same way that we do with our linear business." So it's actually about, part of the understand stage is about understanding whether what you're seeing is actually good or not, and what kind of target should you be setting for, say, subscriber acquisition or retention. And then I think finally what's really important is a lot of companies, especially those with that have less so for sports companies and other companies that haven't got a media distribution background, but for those that do, I think it's super important to use the data to understand that which of your known knowns no longer apply. So there's lots of, again, from their main TV businesses, there will be a lot of perceived wisdom about what your customers, who your customers are and what they like and how they will behave. And sometimes that will also apply in direct to consumer, but sometimes it won't. So again, it's part of the understand stage is actually getting to grips with how the things that the ways that you've done business before actually kind of don't apply for direct to consumer. And so there's a few projects we've done that are really have been aimed at helping customers to understand the data that they've surfaced and make use of it. So this is a customer segmentation that we put together for OTT, and this is really about helping them to kind of visualize what their new OTT customer base looks like in a more interesting, useful way than just looking at people who watch sports or people who watch movies, which is important, but is not the only game in town. And the output of this is to help them to essentially market to and retain these subscribers better by giving them offerings that are relevant to that segment. We also have done projects looking at VOD. So this was a project where the brief was tell us what good looks like, and this was about creating stages of VOD users and kind of helping the customer to understand, okay, if I get a VOD user who watches something for the first time in a given month, how many months do they need to keep watching for it to be sort of highly unlikely that they will churn out, and at what point can I kind of say that customer is probably safe? At what point in time is a customer most likely to lapse from VOD? And so then, should I be targeting them a lot after a month? Should I be targeting them a lot after 3 months? So it's about, again, sort of helping them to put that data that they've got at their disposal into perspective and start to kind of use it. And then this is a kind of similar project. This is about content engagement. So this is taking a customer's data and saying, okay, we know how the shows and how the genres have done in terms of the basic metrics like kind of minutes watched and time spent, but actually what does that mean, and which of our segments are most engaged in, spend most time with each of these pieces of content. So and I think this was really interesting because there are some kind of insights that are I guess, if you think about it, are kind of less surprising. So the fact that people who pay, so you've got this kind of subscription OTT high usage segment that watches a lot of kids content, which I think is probably not surprising, because in traditional pay TV we see a lot of people who subscribe to pay TV do so for the kids content. Kind of slightly more counterintuitively, what we found was actually the people who didn't pay for OTT were big sports fans, even though there is sports content on the OTT service. The fact that the sports indexed so heavily against the kind of people who were using the free service, but the fact that these users weren't upgrading to the pay service kind of shows you that actually the company needs to do a slightly better job at reaching these and persuading these free users to upgrade to the subscription offering. So again, this is all about taking the data and trying to understand a bit better what it's actually telling you beyond the obvious. And so finally, ACT. So ACT is sometimes what we call the fun bit. So once you have your data engineering project is done, your infrastructure is set up and is delivering data to the people who need it, and you're starting to understand what the data is telling you and some of the things you may need to kind of fix or improve in your business. ACT is the stage where you start to try and fix or improve those things by using data. So there's tons of kind of data science projects that we could talk about, but I'm just going to go through some of the ones that I think are kind of most interesting and most relevant to this audience. So we do a lot of work helping companies to build what we call device graphs. And so if you're a big media company, it's likely that you have lots of different services, some of which will be free, but you have to register, some of which will be subscription based, some may be a household based service, some may be a personal based service. And so it's about really bringing all of that kind of device data together and starting to paint a picture and say, okay, where is their usage in common of my free service with my pay service, which of course you're not going to see if you don't have to register for the free service. So this is about using a combination of what we call deterministic and probabilistic matching to start saying, okay, if I see usage of this free OTT app on the same IP address as I have a subscription service on, I can use the IP address to match these devices together and say that actually this free service probably belongs to this household. So this is about starting to kind of helping customers to build that picture of their user base across multiple apps. We do a lot of work of what is called kind of tune-in in the US, and probably more commonly known as promo analysis or attribution elsewhere. But this is essentially customers who have shows that they want to promote, understanding where in that promotion actually which of the kind of ways that they're promoting the show are most likely to drive tune in to the show. So if you're spending kind of $1 million across 10 different channels, you want to promote your show, you want to know which of those channels is most successful at driving people to watch the show, because then you can optimize your investment when it comes around to doing another promo show. We also do a lot of multi-touch attribution in this in this area. So again, if you're using, let's say that you're a consumer and you're exposed to a promo for a show on all 10 of those networks, actually the challenge for the broadcaster is actually, well, okay, which of these 10 networks was most important and most impactful in driving someone to actually watch the show, if they've been exposed to all 10. So we have a multi-touch attribution method that kind of passes out the individual impact of each of those networks at driving tune-in, which gives our customers much more actionable and kind of relevant information to help to make buying decisions in the future. We do a lot of work around customer retention. So it is obviously a huge issue, for kind of traditional pay TV. I think particularly for OTT, given the sort of relative ease of churning out of your OTT subscription compared to churning out of a traditional pay TV service. So we do a lot of work building what we call random forest models, which identify kind of which, looking at a base of customers, identifying the features amongst the customers who have churned that are the most kind of prevalent to that customer base versus the customers who haven't churned, and then using those features to understand kind of which customers are most at risk of churning if they start to develop signs in their usage behavior that they might be churning, and then helping our customers to do something about that. So helping them to come up with kind of more relevant offers, or offers given at a more relevant time that will save that customer from churning. And you don't need a particularly, churn being the kind of costly issue that it is for MVPDs and broadcasters and operators. You don't need to have a huge impact on churn for this to be a really valuable exercise. We do a lot of work around representative modeling. So in the US and increasingly in Europe as well, we're seeing lots of data sets, kind of TV viewing data sets beyond the kind of traditional Barbs and Nielsen's and panels of this world come into the market from people like smart TV companies, from set-top box vendors, from OTT providers. So there's now lots of different ways that you can view kind of get a look at viewing in a market or in a country. But all of these data sets are quite different, and they tend to have different SKUs. They tend to report slightly differently, and they getting those data sets together is not just a simple case of kind of melding them together, because you'll get very strange results. So we do a lot of work carrying out data fusion between different data sources. So this is for a customer in the US, where we fused a smart TV based data set and a sort of local set-top box based data set. So obviously the local set-top box based data set had great coverage across that company's footprint, but didn't have great kind of national coverage. So what they wanted to do was bring together these two data sets to get a combined data set for the market that was both broad and deep. So that's quite a complex kind of data science problem, using things like iterative proportional fitting, if that means anything to you, and building kind of lookalike models and nearest neighbor models to actually understand how we should bring these panels together. So this is I think this will become an increasingly important kind of exercise as we expect to happen, more and more TV viewing data sets kind of come into the market. And then finally, this is kind of more of a data engineering project than the others I've shown, but I think it definitely still fits in the ACT stage. So this is a company that wanted to build a system that its sales team can use to drive ad sales, and so this is about building an importer that takes in all of the different kind of data sets in that market, via which a company can build kind of segments that an ad sales team can sell. So that sometimes that's kind of traditional panel data from a Nielsen or a Barb, but it's also data from kind of third parties, from companies like Experian, and so any data that you can use to build a TV viewing segment gets kind of imported into this database. And we built a system that allows any person, not just a data scientist, but any kind of salesperson, to essentially create segments that they can then go to their customers with to try and sell. And so this was the reason the company wanted to do this, was again to kind of take advantage of all of these new TV viewing data sets and be able to create these segments in an easy way and in an understandable way, so that kind of a non-technical audience can still understand and use them. So that was the segment generation project. We do a lot of work kind of helping companies to understand from a sort of planning perspective. I mean, this is kind of similar to the last example, but sort of flipped on its head. So this is if a company wants to buy, if a company has a target that they want to reach and they want to achieve the kind of the best the best kind of optimal buy across TV and digital, what we will do is help them to understand actually how they should make that buy. How heavy should the TV buy be? How heavy should the digital buy be, based on where the audience is and where the segments they're most interested in are across both TV and digital. So this is kind of basic reach and frequency analysis, but again using lots more data sets than we've kind of been able to use in previous years. And that's kind of all of the examples I wanted to show. I think I really like this. We kind of put together this summary for describe, understand, and act. I think if you're in the describe stage, your key focus needs to be kind of not just thinking about your kind of fancy dashboards, but getting your data and infrastructure, making sure that is kind of shipshape before you start to think about visualizing. Visualizing should really be the last stage of that, last step of that stage. The understand stage, I think for me, the key thing to do there is focus. Don't focus on not just what you kind of don't know, but actually challenge. When you get these data sets, challenge your assumptions and your own kind of biases about what your business is like and how your service is going to perform. Make sure you challenge those so that you're not just kind of reinforcing your own biases. One of the great things about having all the data and past the describe stage is that you can actually start to kind of, as I said, challenge these assumptions. And then on act, I think typically one of the things we hear from our customers all the time is that their data science team has kind of three projects in mind for every one project they're able to deliver. Everybody who has lots of data typically has lots of things they want to do with it. So I think the key there is to actually focus on, what are your key opportunities, focusing on doing a few things well rather than trying to do lots of things, and understanding if there's a certain opportunity that is going to have the quickest kind of revenue impact, or if there's an opportunity that's going to have kind of the biggest impact across a larger number of teams. Just working out what is most important, and then really kind of focusing on executing on that. So that's everything. That's the end of our presentation. I hope that was useful. Thank you all very much for joining. I don't know if there are any questions now.
There are. So Giles, hi everyone. It's Luke again. I think we've got time for a couple of questions. So let me turn to the chat window. So obviously, so appreciate this is somewhat of a how long is a piece of string question, but in your experience, how long does it take to progress through the three stages that you've highlighted in the presentation?
That is a really good. It's slightly a how long is a piece of string question, but it's also a really good question. I mean, we've definitely seen. I think we've definitely seen sort of both big and small companies race through them quite quickly. I think there's no, we've started working with companies who, in the space of kind of 18 months, have gone pretty quickly through the describe and understand stage, and who are kind of starting to build models. And I think the companies who tend to go through that stage most quickly are those that are focused, and those that are kind of most. I think discipline is quite important. So actually being really disciplined about, there's always going to be a temptation from, say, a management team or a board member to carry out a specific project because it's a kind of flashpoint, or it's something that's of high interest. But actually, we find the companies that do best out of this stage are the ones that really focus on getting those basics right and getting those basics up and running, essentially learning to crawling before learning to walk, as opposed to trying to start running. So it can be done. Yeah, it can be done quite quickly, I think, if you're quite focused.
Great, thank you. And the second question, I think the final one that we have time for. Thanks for a great presentation. How would you, if we wanted to get out and start implementing the types of changes that you've recommended, where should we start? Sorry, where should we start?
Jan, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, that could be an interesting one to answer. I think you need to take a holistic view, and that was the delta that I mentioned, and maybe doing this spider view, trying to decide which areas are important for you to succeed in getting into the stage 4 and such, and putting their energies there. If I take the typical examples, is the leadership is a very important area to get alignment in your internal strategies. If you don't have the ability to influence the leadership, you might need to do a proof of concept study, is what I call the stage 2. And actually, from the return of investment, by doing the experiment succeeding, you can show to the upper management, let's put more efforts in having a general company strategy on analytics, not only for a specific area. And also another key aspect is your analytics partners. There is often an internal fight within companies when it comes to who owns what responsibilities and where are the expertise. And that you might, even like data, there's the analytics teams, they might be siloed, and trying to get the teams to collaborate and work more effectively. So those are the 2 areas that I would focus on: getting a good leadership to invest in, let's make decisions based on the analytics, and then also getting a good analytics partner or analytics team within the company. And I appreciate having the opportunity talking about competing on analytics. Over to you, Luke.
Great. Giles, Jan, thanks so much. Really enjoyed that. And Jan, thank you for featuring all of my favorite slides and graphs and charts. That's much appreciated. Thank you also to everyone who dialed in. Really appreciate your time and hope that was interesting and valuable for you. You can see Giles and Jan's contact details in the last slide here, and obviously hope you will have mine as well. We'd love to hear from you if you are interested in discussing any of this further. Both Dativa and Accedo will be at IBC, so if you're there, please come and find us. Have a great day, everyone. Many thanks.